Hi, friends. This is Adam Shoemaker, Rector at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in downtown Charleston, back for another edition of Rector's Corner. And I'm very happy to have with me today my good friend, the Very Reverend Dr. Michael Shaffer, interim rector at nearby St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Not long ago, Father Michael and I led an evening faith formation night at St. James on faith and politics and the 2024 election. I thought it was a wonderful conversation. It brought our communities and others together. But I know that there were some folks who were unable to attend. And so in this conversation, we're going to recap some of the main points of each of the areas that we ran through. We're going to talk a little bit about why we believe politics should matter to Christians, to people of faith. What are our values when we engage in the political process, in the public sphere? And then lastly, how practically can we engage in this particular time and this tenuous election season that we find ourselves in. And we're going to spend perhaps a little bit more time today drilling into that. Michael, thanks so much for making the time to be with me for this continuing conversation. And I'll get us started with that first question of why should politics matter? I said when we began that conversation that sometimes I find it helpful to look at the etymology of words. And if we look at that word politics, it comes from a Greek word polis that refers to the ancient Greek city or the city-state. And so politics, originally speaking, was how the city was organized in order to promote the common good. And I think as Christians, another way that we can look at that is that politics is simply a tool that we have to better care for and love our neighbor, especially our neighbor on the margins. And if you look at politics from that lens, I would argue that the Gospels are inherently political documents because we see in the Gospels, in those stories that talk about the life and ministry of Jesus, we see Jesus so often speaking truth to power. We see Jesus so often speaking up for the marginalized and the powerless. I think there's a lot that we can take from the Gospels if we think about politics is how we care for our neighbor. And when we gathered a couple of weeks ago, I lifted up as one example that great parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus tells that the evangelical pastor Jim Wallace recently said. I heard him say might just be the key to a multiracial democracy from a Christian perspective, because of course in this parable Jesus is being tested by a scholar about what it means to love one's neighbor, who is one's neighbor, and he tells this story, this parable about a Jew who is beaten and left for dead, and then all the usual suspects come walking by, but ultimately it's a Samaritan who at the time of Jesus would have been an enemy of the Jewish people. And it's a Samaritan who comes to this man's aid. And then Jesus asked that religious scholar, who do you think was the true neighbor to the man who needed help? And the scholar points out the Samaritan, and Jesus says, go and do likewise. And so it's not just about loving your neighbor. It's about crossing boundaries. It's about caring for our neighbors, not just those we know, but those that we do not know, and really trying to consider the common good. And so those were some of my points for why politics matters. I wonder, Michael, what you would say to that question.
Well, Adam, first let me say thank you and the people of St. Stephen's for undertaking this really important work. And I'm really grateful that you invited me to participate. Politics really is the way in which we as a society structure and order our common life. And Christianity is about a common life. So, I'm always amazed at the number of people that come to me and say, "Oh, Father Michael, politics doesn't have any place in religion or the church." And I say to them with all great respect, perhaps you might want to read the Bible, because it is in our tradition, deep in our tradition, that we've always been involved with government. Look at the Old Testament when Moses was sent to take on the Pharaoh. We have books in the Old Testament titled Judges and Kings. That is government. So I think when you look at it from a perspective of being engaged in how we structure and order our common life, Christians are not only called, but they have an obligation to become involved in the discussion in the public square and vote. So it is not whether or not we should be involved in the political process, but rather, I think, how we are involved. That is the question.
Absolutely. Another thing that I acknowledged right off the bat when we had that faith formation night is that I think when people hear that word politics today, what they're thinking about really is partisanship, right? They're thinking about the battles that we see happening on cable TV between Democrats and Republicans. But I think that, again, politics is a sphere that we step into as we try as faithful people to love our neighbor as ourselves in the here and now, in tangible, practical ways, in ways that matter and impact people's lives. And so I think there's a different way to consider what we mean when we talk about politics. It doesn't have to be just talking about the political parties.
And I might say to that point, Adam, as much as I hate to admit it, I think we, good-meaning Christians, many of us have considerable fault in how politics, in terms of what you've just spoken about, have become so partisan. We've had different groups of well-meaning, self-professed Christians decide that they need to use politics as a Christian agenda versus using politics as an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace, as an opportunity to express our committed faith, our ideals, what we profess in the outline of the faith and our baptismal covenant in the public square. So I'm hoping that the Christians that have felt previously that politics has no place in the church will reclaim, to some extent, those foundational values that we profess in our baptismal covenant in the public square.
Well, and that leads me into the second piece of what I'd like us to review, and that is, if it's important to engage in the public square, what are the values that we bring as followers of Jesus? And when we had our faith formation night, I began this section by sharing just a little bit about my personal story. Those who have come to know me know that I have a multiracial, multi-faith background. I am the child of an American Caucasian mother and an Arab father from Egypt. I have Christians, Jews, and Muslims in my family tree. And so growing up as a young person, it took me a long time to fully embrace the totality of my personhood. I talked a little bit about how, as a native New Yorker, the 9/11 attacks were a profound inflection point for my life. But it's always been very important for me personally to strive for a society that is inclusive, that welcomes all, that celebrates the diversity of the human family. And as I've leaned into my Christian faith, I've seen many of those values taken to another level. And the place that I really begin when it comes to the Christian tradition is the baptismal covenant, those vows that we take in baptism, that I see as a kind of ordination document of sorts for all of us. And of course, the baptismal covenant professes belief in the triune God. And then we have these 5 baptismal promises. But those last 2 for me are so critically important. When we, strive to seek and serve Christ in all people, loving our neighbor as ourselves, and where we promise to strive for justice and peace, and work for a world where the inherent worth and dignity of every human being is respected. I take those vows so seriously, and those vows inform so much of the work that I do out in the community beyond the walls of the church that I serve. For me, it's about walking in that way of love that our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, talks to us about, a way, a vision that I see amplified in the Beatitudes that we read in the Gospels of Matthew and of Luke. And since our faith formation night, I'll also just add, I preached a sermon recently at St. Stephen's where I reflected on one of my favorite Bible verses, and that is Jeremiah 29:7. Jeremiah, who is sometimes referred to as the weeping prophet, ministered during a time of exile when the people of Israel were far from home, far from where they were accustomed to encountering God's presence. And then Jeremiah gets a word that says, "Seek the welfare of the city where I have put you, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." Seek the welfare of the city where I've put you, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. I love that verse because it calls to mind what Martin Luther King once said, that we are all bound up in a mutual garment of destiny. What happens to one happens to all, meaning I can't be all that I hope to be until my neighbor, and especially my neighbor in need, is all that they hope to be. And so our very welfare is tied up in the welfare of the common good. And to me, that's another really important piece of what I bring as a person of faith as I go out into the public square. What would you say to that question?
Well, as you shared part of your personal story, it made me think that indeed you being here with me is somewhat of a God wink, because it's the intersection of faith and politics that resulted in me being with you even here today. Many people who might be viewing this know that I'm a recovering trial attorney, having practiced law for 30 some years. And I started the practice of law in the early 1980s as an assistant prosecuting attorney in Jackson County, Missouri, with another young assistant by the name of Claire McCaskill. And in 1992, we both decided to run for the office of prosecuting attorney. And Claire, having much more political skill than I, it became evident to me the last several months of the election that I was not going to prevail. So I spent Sunday mornings those last 2 months in African American churches and Black churches where candidates were readily available and invited to come up and speak in the pulpit. And that resulted 6 or 7 years later in my going into the process, becoming ordained as a deacon, and then later a priest. And while Claire and I don't agree on everything, we still remain friends. And the last time